Okay, so continuing our conversation about World War II, 1931 through 1945, I want to talk today about what the mobilization effort looks like in the United States. So here are our key terms again. Make sure we're on the lookout for those, and our make sure that we are able to do list. So explain how the United States becomes more involved in the conflict. We talked about that with the Lend-Lease Act. Skipping through Pearl Harbor because that's where we finished off last time. Excuse me. We're going to be talking about the mobilization effort today. Okay, so this is an image of the USS West Virginia, which burned for hours after being hit by several torpedoes during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. You can see in the foreground there some sailors in a small boat that rescue a survivor that you can also see barely visible in the water. So that's a pretty amazing colorized image. I love these colorized images and these colorized videos from this time period. I think it just lends a real sort of historical realism to them. This is an image of young men waiting in line to volunteer for the U.S. Navy on December 8th, my goodness, 1941. Remember, Pearl Harbor happens on December 7th. December 7th is Pearl Harbor Day, so this is the very next day. There is a draft, but because of what happened at Pearl Harbor, there were a lot of men who were eager to enlist immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor. You see the same thing on 9/11, 2001. There were a lot of men who decided right there and then to serve their country, and enlistment, jumped. So it says, following the Japanese attack, a spirit of patriotism and service swept across the country, inspiring exceptional actions by military personnel and civilians alike. Americans searched for ways to contribute to the war effort. They joined the military, volunteered with the Red Cross and other organizations, and moved into new jobs to help. Things have to happen in order to support this war effort. And thankfully, the United States had already been ramping up or mobilizing its production of things like aircraft and tanks because of the Lend-Lease Act. But Americans were still on the fence about whether or not they were going to wholeheartedly support this war effort. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, that 100% changes, and Americans are all in. As it says, they threw themselves into mobilizing. Look at these graphs and think about how American production of tanks and aircraft compares to that of other countries for both the Allies and the Axis powers. I know we are all familiar with this image. We can do it. Rosie the Riveter. A riveter is a rivet. It's a special drill that sort of puts bolts through steel on aircraft, holds the panels of steel together on an airplane or even a ship. But mostly they're referring to an airplane. And a riveter was somebody who used that tool. So we've all seen this image. Women are encouraged to do their part by working in the defense industry. All over the United States, American industry quickly converted to war production in order to meet the nation's military needs. As the economic effects of World War II brought the Great Depression to an end, the millions of unemployed men who had been such a common sight during the 1930s seemed to vanish overnight. They either joined the military, worked to produce food for the world on the nation's rich farms, or labored in factories producing war material. Material is not spelled correctly. Soon, factories needed to hire workers outside of their usual pool of mostly white men. To keep production going, more women and African Americans found opportunity in defense industries, although they still faced significant obstacles to gaining and succeeding in those jobs. That's a riveter. Those are the rivets, and that's the rivet gun. That's what a riveter does. This is a graph of American women in work during World War II, and I want you to look at these numbers and think about the trends in women working during and immediately after World War II. So look at the bottom right. Let's look there. During the war, 25% of women worked outside the home. After the war, it drops down to 7.5. So many of those women went back home to their traditional role once the men came home and took those jobs back over. This has to do with the GDP, or the gross domestic product. It is the yearly value of goods and services created by a nation. Think about the relationship among the three graphs here. So we have a graph of federal spending from 1940 through 1946. So you can see how it goes up. The war ends in 45 and then drops in 46. Federal spending in 1945, what are we spending it on? 89.5% is going to our national defense. Look at agriculture all the way down there at 1.7. And then you can see the debt is highest in 46, again, just after the war. War bonds, it says 85 million Americans, over half the population, purchased $185.7 billion worth of war bonds. War bonds were little certificates of paper you could purchase from the government that helped to directly fund the war. Not all Americans are included in the spirit of unity. The attack on Pearl Harbor also spread fear across America. Federal government began drafting policies aimed towards immigrants and aliens from the Axis nations. Aliens are foreign citizens who are living in the United States. All resident enemy aliens, so if you were an Italian who was living in the United States, and if you were an Italian American living in the United States, a German American, or someone from Germany living in the United States, a Japanese American, or just someone from Japan living in the United States. Everyone was required to register with the government, submit to fingerprinting, and list their organizational affiliation. And then further, all citizens with German, Italian, and Japanese heritage in the United States had to register. Not heritage, I shouldn't say, so it wouldn't matter if your great-grandfather, but if you were German and you were a citizen, but you had been born in Germany, you had to register with the government and identify supporting details. It's printed in 4 languages so that, well, I think you can draw your own conclusion from that, so that everyone would be able to see. This is also the time of internment, Japanese internment, which we will be doing a special assignment on as well. Wartime needs encouraged migration, so movement. People from rural areas, whites and African Americans, moved north to industrialized cities and west to California. They sought jobs in wartime industries or near military bases. Farmers looked for creative ways to keep their farms producing necessary food. The moving population and new jobs invigorated Americans, but the effects of changing demographics also led to strain and unrest in some areas. All right, we will continue this conversation.